Okay, so this is the exercise that I gave as homework. Okay, maybe I'll just briefly re-explain the step-by-step calculation. So in this case, all the inputs already provided. So just make sure that you convert everything into SI. Over here you have a particle diameters is still in centimeter. So of course, first you have to convert it to 0.015 meter. This is quite big particle. Okay, it's in the order of centimeter. And then you check this is already in meter per second, so that's ready to be used. And just by looking at the velocity, it looks like a turbulent regimes because 10 meter per second is considered very fast. Density is already ready in kilogram per cubic meter, and then the viscosity that's already in Pascal second. Void fraction and bed height and everything is ready. So again, just put all the number over here, then the USF, and then the density of the fluid. Okay, then the void fraction, and then the viscosity. So I think you will get almost certain turbulent. If I perform a quick calculation, maybe in the order of 16,000 something. Okay, that's the Reynolds number. So it confirmed that it is in the turbulent regime. And then afterwards, you get the Reynolds that's ready to be used to calculate the FP. And since it is a very turbulent regimes, the impact on the FP becomes less significant. It will be very close to the constant of 1.75. So probably you will get something close to 1.75 or 1.76. That's the rough number for the turbulent regime. Okay. And last but not least, the final question is about the pressure drop. So that's the pressure drop. So now you just have to rearrange the equation. Fp times rho USF square 1 minus epsilon L per dp epsilon. Okay, so that's the Fp that you got in the previous part, and then everything else you just have to put the number. Okay, any question regarding the homework?
No, sir.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of the number, I think this should give you a relatively large pressure drop. Okay, why? Because this is a turbulent, so the FP is quite high and so on. So I think it would be in the order of 200,000 Pascal something, which is equal to around 2 bar. Okay, so that can be considered as a large pressure drop in a fixed bed. So if you want to reduce the pressure drop, of course, one of the obvious way is to reduce the velocity. Okay, so if you get something close to plus minus 2 bar, okay, that's considered as a high pressure drop. So of course, by just only looking on the equation, that's where the main contributor. So the 10 meter per second, if you even decrease it to 1 meter per second, I believe that makes a huge impact, maybe in the order of 100-fold decrease. Okay, so that's the quick analysis. Okay. So if you don't have any question, then I'll continue on the next part, which is the fluidized bed. Okay, so previously we still talk about the fixed bed, which means the particle is not lifted. It remains unmoved within the vessels. Okay, but there are some other application that requires a fluidization, such as combustion or even a catalytic cracking reaction. So the presence of the solid could be illustrated as a coal if it's a combustion of coal, or even if it's a catalytic cracking, then the particle itself is the catalyst that is not consumed. Okay, so the key over here is you just need to keep increasing the velocity. Okay, you keep increasing the velocity until it reach the above the minimum fluidization condition. So again, this is the 7 regimes that we have. We've talked about this, the fixed bed. Okay, and even the minimum fluidization can still be modeled similarly to what's all the formula used in the fixed bed condition. Okay, because this is like the final point before the particle is lifted. That means you still can use the formula for the FP. You can still use the formula for the delta P, and so on. Okay, so all the formula will still be the same for the minimum fluidization. The only difference is all of this will be calculated at minimum fluidization velocity. So that's the extra step that you require, or even that should be the first step that you calculate for all fluidization regime. Okay, because you once you calculate the UMF, then you compare it with the U actual. Okay, compare with actual velocity, okay, or USF. In case that your actual case is higher than UMF, then you know that you are already in the fluidization regime. Okay, but when you calculate that the UMF is actually still lower than your, okay, that's a mistake. If your actual velocity is still lower than UMF, then you are still in the fixed bed regime. It's still not lifted. Okay, so that's the illustration. In the direction, the velocity will increase, and then the void fraction will also increase. Okay, just by looking at the picture, it becomes less dense in terms of the particle distributions. So this is some of the example or the application of a fluidized bed in real practice. First one is a gasification, for example, gasification for coal or even for biomass. Okay, biomass means like a palm kernel, palm shell. Okay, so that kind of thing that can be gasified. The objective of gasification is to convert from this kind of feed that goes into the gasification, and then you will get a syngas, okay, which is a CO plus H2 mainly, okay, that is called as a syngas, synthetic gas. Once you get as a CO and hydrogen, you can produce a different kind of process, okay, for example, like a methanol or for liquid fuel and other type of chemicals. Okay, so a lot of different things. It opens the gate for a lot of chemical production. So it's like a partial combustion. If you can imagine, it's like a partial combustion. Why it's partial? That means you provide the oxygen not until the stoichiometric requirement. Okay, so if you have a coal or a biomass, and then this is the primary air, so that means that's the oxygen plus nitrogen that also serve as a combustion air. Okay, that's what I meant, that the amount of the combustion air is limited, so that it will not perform a complete combustion, because when you perform a complete combustion, that means you produce energy plus CO2 plus water. But in some application, we don't want the combustion to complete, because we actually want to get this CO plus H2, which can be used for further application. So in this kind of application, you can imagine that of course the biomass has to be the diameter of the particle has to be decreased before it reach to the gasification. So before it's sent to the gasifier, maybe it has some kind of crusher, for example, to decrease the particle size. so that it will be easy to be fluidized and it will be easy to be combusted. Okay, so that's the direction of the solid, and then the primary air is designed in a way that the velocity will be above the velocity of the minimum fluidization. In that case, this kind of sand or the biomass bed can be fluidized, and then so that the combustion will be performed as designed. Okay. So this is another example of fluidized bed combustion. So here we have a coal. Again, coal must be crushed so that the diameter is not too big, and then it's sent to the main combustion chamber, where it will contact with the fluidizing air. Again, that is oxygen plus nitrogen, or even pure oxygen in some case. Okay, so when we're talking about the physical properties of the components involved in the fluidized bed combustion, so when we talk about the density of the gas, we are talking about the oxygen and nitrogen. When we're talking about the viscosity of the gas, we're talking about the viscosity of the oxygen and nitrogen sent from the bottom of the column. Okay, while this is the solid. Okay, that's the solid. So when we're talking about the particle diameter, we're talking about particle diameter of the coal and the limestone that will be combusted. And if in some case it requires the density of the solid, again, that's the density of the initial coal before it's sent to the fluidization column. Okay. So it's a bit different when you see this slide 31 and next slide 32. Why? Because over here the solid is actually consumed. So when we have a combustion, that means we burn a coal plus oxygen into CO2 plus H2O. Okay, so C is actually consumed. So when the coal is lifted to the above part of the combustion or the boiler, okay, the particle actually becomes smaller and smaller. Okay? The particle becomes smaller and smaller. Why? Because the C inside of the coal is reacted with oxygen, and it's already filled by CO2 plus H2O at the top part of the, which is a flue gas. So if you heard anything about flue gas, that's the product of a combustion, CO2 plus H2. Maybe there are still nitrogen because nitrogen is inert, so they just pass through the system and then send to the stack. Okay, so here you can imagine that the solid particle becomes less and less, becomes smaller and smaller. So of course the dynamic of the column change as a function of height of the column. Maybe here you still have a big particle, then it becomes smaller, and at the top it becomes very, very small. So of course, when we're talking about the Reynolds particle, when we're talking about the minimum fluidization condition, it changes along the way. The smaller the particle, the easier it will be uplifted by the fluidizing air. Okay. Here, this is another common examples of fluidization that can be found in almost all oil refinery, okay, crude oil refinery. So the main purpose is a cracking unit. So cracking, that means we want to convert heavy hydrocarbon into light hydrocarbon, okay, into light hydrocarbon. Light hydrocarbon, what's the example of light hydrocarbon? So that could be as a gas, that could be as a gasoline, that could be as a gas oil, instead of the heavy hydrocarbon that is less valuable, maybe like a residue or wax, something like that. Okay, so here the particle is not the feed. That's the big difference. The feed itself is the residue. Okay, is the residue. So here you have a combustion air. Still you have a combustion air. That's the regenerator, while the reactor itself is this part, reactor or separation vessel. So you have a raw oil, okay, residue, okay, as a feed, and then it's sent by a pump. So it will be able to goes towards the riser. So, and then becomes vaporized, and then it will contact with the steam. So that's where the cracking happens. Okay, that's the cracking reaction. So the objective is here. Initially, it was still in the residue. Now it becomes a smaller chain of hydrocarbon. Then it's ready to be separated or fractionated. Okay, so a couple different products over here. The different part here is where is the solid, where is the particle, and the particle is the catalyst. Okay, so you have a particle, you have a catalyst, which will help the cracking process to be enhanced, which will help the residence time of the cracking process to be accelerated. Okay, so the size shouldn't be that big. Okay, and when we're talking about fluidization, of course, the particle will be uplifted once it's saturated. Okay, once it's saturated, so there will be a continuous flow of a solid. Here we say it as a span catalyst. That means the catalyst is maybe layered by coke, layered by any other impurities from the reaction, and it's already almost deactivated. Okay, when it's almost deactivated, then we send it to the regenerator. Then you put a combustion air, then you burn the catalyst in the regenerator to produce another flue gas, that means CO2 plus H2O. But here we focus on the particle. The particle now already becomes activated. Okay, it's already activated, so it's ready to be used as a regenerated catalyst. Here again, you can see over here, that's another fluidization regime. Why? Because over here, the span catalyst, the flow is supplied by gravity. Okay, so only by putting above elevation, it's easy to be sent to the regenerator. Then here, if you need some fluidization, then that's the purpose of the combustion air. The velocity again has to be designed in a way that it reach above the minimum fluidization regime. Then when you ready to return the catalyst back into the reactor, it becomes a problem. Why? Because solid is not a fluid. It's harder to be transported, right? So it's already almost at the bottom of the elevation, almost at the ground level. So when you want to put it upward into the reactor, that's where, again, you need a help from fluidizing air, okay, or maybe from fluidizing liquid. So here the catalyst will be mixed all together by all these two different streams. Okay? But this is like resembles fluidization phenomena. Okay, so please look very carefully, and if you still don't understand this picture, please ask, because this is I will say, one of the most important phenomena and one of the most important slide in this topic. Okay, if you understand this chart, then it will be very easy for you to calculate the pressure drop in all different position or all different regimes. Okay, first, last week or on Tuesday, we've already talked about the fixed bed regime. Okay, we've already talked about the fixed bed regime. So let me copy paste my formula, okay, to make you easier to understand. Okay, maybe I'll copy this one. Okay, here that's the formula for a fixed bed. That's all. That's the starting point for a fixed bed, right? So when you want to calculate the delta P, it's a function of F multiplied by dP. Sorry, that's correct. Rho USF square 1 minus epsilon L per dP epsilon cubic. Okay, focus on the USF, because I told you that when you want to switch from fixed bed to fluidized bed, you have to keep increasing the USF. You have to keep increasing the velocity. Okay, that's why in this x-axis you have UO or USF. Okay, that's the same thing. So when you're still in the fixed bed and you want to get into the fluidized bed, of course you need to keep increasing the velocity. But the interesting thing about this measurement is the pressure drop is almost like linear in a way when you're still in a fixed bed region. Okay, so I think don't forget that this is logarithmic, so it's not completely linear. Okay? So the important thing is in the fixed bed, the delta P is proportional to the square, to the quadratic of the velocity. That's why when you increase the velocity, the delta P increased. Okay, that's delta P increase up until you reach this very important point of A. Okay, that is called as a minimum fluidization. That's the first time where the particle can be uplifted at UMF. Okay, so why I told you that you can model the minimum fluidization condition using this fixed bed condition. Okay, because that's at the end of the fixed bed point. So this formula becomes still applicable. Okay, at UMF. So delta P at minimum fluidization will still be the same formula at UMF. Instead of USF, you must make sure that the velocity is exactly at UMF. Okay. But the other interesting thing is when we go into this fluidized bed region, see what's the trend. You keep increasing the velocity. Okay, you keep increasing the velocity. Let's say initially UMF is around 3 centimeter per second or 4 centimeter per second. You increase to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, even 20, 30. And you get that, okay, actually, my pressure drop will remain more or less the same. Delta P at minimum fluidization. That will be the same with delta P at fluidization region. Okay. That's a general consensus in fluidization regime. So using this understanding, now the question is how can I calculate delta P at fluidization region? Should I develop another complex equations? Should I use equation from different reference or measure from different experiment and so on? Actually, no. When we understand and when we agree and we can validate that it is true at this region, the delta P will similar to delta P at minimum fluidization. Okay, so now even for delta P at fluidized condition, okay, you still can use the same formula for a fixed bed as long as you put the correct velocity. Okay, in that case, what you need to use is actually still the UMF square 1 minus epsilon L per dp epsilon cubic. Okay, so you can still use the same velocity. You still can use the same formula as long as you evaluate at the UMF. Okay. So in this case, if I use this exact picture, okay, you see that, okay, let's say that the UMF is 4 centimeter per second. Okay, and then later you are asked to evaluate the identical process, the identical particle, but the only difference is you're working with 20 centimeter per second. That's your actual velocity. Okay. Now you're being asked, what's the pressure drop of this actual condition. How can you calculate this delta P at actual condition at 20 centimeter per second? So simply go to this formula. Okay, calculate the Reynolds particle so that you can calculate the F. Calculate or use the rho, use the epsilon, use the particle diameter. But the big decision-making process is use the correct UMF. Okay, so even though you're working at 20 centimeter per second, to calculate the pressure drop, you still use the UMF over here. So don't use the 20 centimeter per second, but instead use the what's the UMF for those particle size. Okay, the thing is, if you're really working in a lab or if you're working in an experiment, okay, what you can measure is this actual velocity. You cannot measure the minimum fluidization directly. Okay, so maybe the UMF has to be calculated. Okay, so that's why it's important for you to calculate. I know that I'm working at 20 centimeter per second, but that will not be used in the delta P calculation. Instead, I need to calculate what is the UMF for this particle size. Once I know, okay, this is actually 4 centimeter per second, then I can use those UMF number into the delta P at this actual 20 centimeter per second condition. Okay, is it understood or any other question regarding this slide? You can imagine the problem when you calculate the delta P actual using the velocity actual. Okay, try to imagine. Now, instead of using the UMF, you still use the actual square. Okay, and so on. Okay, this is incorrect. Why? Just looking the formula here, square UMF, that's 16 centimeter square per second, second square. But if you use 20 centimeter per second square, that becomes 400. Then actually your calculation of pressure drop will be 20 to 25 times bigger than the actual condition. Okay, why? Because we observe that starting from the minimum fluidization, okay, the pressure drop actually will not change even though we'll keep increasing the velocity. Any question? No? Okay, let me continue. Then now it's matters of a common number for this kind of process. Okay, what is the void fraction? So we're talking about epsilon. Okay, epsilon is a void fraction, porosity void fraction. So it's now it's important for you to have a awareness where should your porosity depending on the regimes. Okay, so I think you can Google it. Okay, you can Google it at epsilon MF. Okay, and then you can imagine a porosity. Okay, at fixed bed condition, that means it's unmoved. Okay, that means it's dense. That means it's dense. So if you have a dense spherical particle, okay, the number will can be calculated quite easily. Okay, but now for you, I think the better or the more important part is to get the idea about what is the roughly correct void fraction for fixed bed and then for fluidized bed and for minimum fluidization. Okay, so if I'm talking about a complete sphere, that means sphericity is equal to 1. Usually at fixed bed condition, my epsilon will be in the order of 0.35 to 0.45. Okay, that's the void fraction at fixed bed condition for a complete sphere. When you have other shape, Okay, this is I think the number from Levenspiel book, if I'm not mistaken. Okay, if you have a sharp sand where the sphericity is only 2/3, then you will expect a higher void fraction. Okay, maybe in the order of 0.6 or the order of 0.5. Okay, depending on the size, depending on the sphericity. Then the bigger the size, you can see that the bigger the size, at bigger particle, your epsilon will also be bigger, because maybe if I write, that's probably the easy illustration over here. Here you have a small particle, then it's denser because the free space is actually less than what you have if you have a big particle. Then the written area over here, that's the space that cannot be occupied by the particle, and it becomes bigger proportion because of a bigger particle. Okay. And this is just an example, or just to emphasize, even for one column, the epsilon could be different at different location. Okay, so when we're working with fluidized bed, here at the bottom region, maybe we're working in a bubbling bed condition. So the 1 minus epsilon over here is, what's the number over here? 0.5, 0.55 probably. Okay, so that's the 1 minus epsilon. So the epsilon itself is 0.45. So you can imagine maybe it looks like a bubble bed. Okay, you still have a quite dense particle, especially the bigger particle. And then at the top size, now you're working with turbulent fluidization, and see where is the epsilon over here. Here the epsilon here already 0.3 something, so the epsilon of the fluid already 0.7. Then you have a fast fluidization, maybe over here your epsilon already around 0.2, and then at the top you have epsilon less than 0.01. So even the size becomes smaller and it becomes less dense. Okay, up until the top where it's just like a dot, the smallest particle that can exit the vessel. Okay, I'll skip this one. I think it's not really important for this course. So later, if we are designing a fluidized bed reactor, or we are designing a fluidized bed combustion, then it's important for us to understand the particle distribution. Okay, sometimes called as a PSD, particle size distribution. In that way, we can decide the velocity of the suitable velocity. Okay, so that it can reach the intended fluidization regime. Do we want to work in fixed bed, or in bubble bed, or in fast fluidization, or even in pneumatic configuration? Okay, so let me check. Yeah. This is the last part of the chapter to re-emphasize the pressure drop calculation. Okay, so I said it to you in the previous chart that you can use delta P for fixed bed, for a fluidized bed. For fixed bed, only if velocity is calculated at velocity minimum fluidization. Okay, so I copy paste the same formula over here, but remember to change this SF into minimum fluidization condition. Okay, if you make sure that you evaluate at the correct UMF, then you can calculate the delta P at fluidized bed using this formula. Okay, the other approach or the other alternative, depending on the available data, is you can also calculate using this correlation, where the delta PMF will be equal to 1 minus epsilon MF times the delta density times the length of the bed. Okay, so that's the height of the bed, particle bed. Okay. That these two correlations should give you the same number. Okay, so even if you later want to derive another equation, that's very doable. Okay, specific at minimum fluidization condition. Okay, specific at minimum fluidization condition. Now you can derive that your F rho UMF square 1 minus epsilon L per dp epsilon cubic will be equal to 1 minus epsilon rho minus rho Lg. Okay, in that way, then you can be flexible with what is not known from the, or what's being asked by the exercise. Okay, maybe the question would be what's the epsilon at MF condition. Maybe the condition will ask you what's the particle size that exactly starts to fluidize at this condition. That kind of thing that can be approximated just by playing around with these two equations. Okay, so if it's like a conventional question or a traditional question that simply asks you about the delta P, then you can always go back to this initial equation. Just make sure that you can calculate at UMF condition. Okay, but if the question becomes creative, then the question becomes how to calculate the maximum particle diameter or the epsilon and so on. Then at minimum fluidization condition, you can take advantage of these two equations. Okay, so here comes the important part. By this point, you already understand that I can calculate delta P at fluidized bed if I know what's the UMF. The problem is UMF may not be measured at all time, because when we measure the condition, when we measure the flow meter, what will be reported is the actual velocity, not the minimum fluidization velocity. Okay, so now the question is how can I calculate my UMF? And that can be considered, or that can be calculated using these two formula, which is derived from a terminal velocity. Okay, so this is derived from a terminal velocity, if you remember the course last week. Okay, so particle terminal velocity, we talk about 4 different regimes about this: less than 0.2 Reynolds, and then 2 up until 500, 500 to couple thousand, and to 100,000. Each will have a different drag coefficient, right? Each will have a different drag coefficient. So if another approach is you assume, right? Are you assuming that you're working with a laminar condition, so that the Reynolds particle will be less than 0.2, so that the drag coefficient can be calculated as a function of Reynolds particle? Or do you want to assume that you're working with a fluidization regime? And when you're working with fluidization regime, that means you're assuming the drag coefficient to be 0.44 if it's a sphere, and so on and so on. So using those concepts, now it's actually can be used to calculate what is the UMF. Okay, so the strategy over here will be very similar when you need to calculate the terminal velocity, or you need to calculate the drag coefficient. First, you assume the regime. You assume the regime, and then calculate UMF at assumed regime. then reconfirm Reynolds particle. If the regime is correct, that means consistent with the initial assumption, then finish. Then you finish. But if it's not correct, then you start with different assumption, whether now you're assuming it's a laminar process. Okay, but I will give you a hint, or maybe not a hint, like a note. When we're talking about fluidized bed, of course, we're working usually with a high velocity. Because when we're working with laminar regime, the logic here is the particle has not been lifted. Because it's laminar, then the velocity is small. Okay, so if you're not sure, it's always a good assumption, or it's always a good start for you to assume that you're working in turbulent regime. It's likely, okay, maybe that's the word. The fluidized regime is likely to be turbulent. So if it's turbulent, then U square MF can be calculated as a dP delta rho G density of the gas, epsilon MF, and then the sphericity. Okay. Once you get the UMF, then reconvert the Reynolds particle. Okay, so I think this is the last 2 slides of my part in this course. So I'll give you around 10 minutes, 5 to 10 minutes, okay, to directly perform this exercise and check whether the number will match with the solution provided in the next slide. Okay, so here you have a diameter of particle, dP 1.2 10 minus 4 meter. That's the density of the solid. That's the pressure. Maybe it's required later. That's the temperature. That's the area of the vessel, of the fluidized bed column. And then that's your mass of solid. And then it was reported that at fluidized bed condition, the L fluidized is equal to 3 times of the diameter. Okay, here the porosity is assumed to be 0.05. And the question now is, what is the height of the fixed bed? Then what is the porosity of the bed under minimum fluidization condition? So that's the epsilon MF. And then what is the pressure drop at minimum fluidization condition? And then last but not least, what is the minimum superficial velocity, the UMF? Okay, I'll give you a couple minutes to understand the question first, and let me know what you think, how to solve this problem. Okay, maybe I need to provide you some more information about the air physical properties. At 25 degrees C and 2 atm, rho g is 2.374 kilogram per cubic meter, while the mu g is 1845 10 minus 5 Pascal second. So the equation is not really related with the fluidization part of the fluidization. Okay, maybe it's just a matter of dimension. So you can imagine if you have that's the height and that's the surface area. Okay, because the cross-sectional surface area is already provided. That's already provided as 0.3 square meter. Okay, and then also it was known that the mass of the particle is 300 kilogram. So you can imagine at fixed bed condition. Let me change the color. Okay. It will be dense. Okay, it will be dense. Let's say something like that. Okay, that's the height of the fixed bed. And based on the correlation, you should be able to know that you have a correlation between mass versus volume versus density. What's the correlation between those three variables? So let me put it this way. If that's the mass of the particle, that's the volume of the particle, and that's the rho of the particle. Of course, you should know that the volume of the particle in cubic meter should be mass of the particle divided by the density of the particle. Kilogram per kilogram, correct. So that gives you 300 kilogram divided by 2500 kilogram per cubic meter. Okay, so what's the number over here? Can use a calculator. Okay, I'm going to open my calculator. 300 divided by 2500, 0.12 cubic meter. So all of this blue particle, if all of them are collected all together, the total volume will be 0.12 cubic meter. Okay. Now, how it will relate with the height of the fixed bed versus the surface area. Okay. So of course, that's gonna be the surface area times the height of the fixed bed. But the question is, should you consider the porosity at fixed bed condition? What do you think? Where should you consider this porosity?
Minus the.
Should it be at the as a multiplication or as a division?
So we divide the 0.12 with the epsilon, but yeah, we minus it by 1.
Okay.
Do we also times the area or no?
Okay, just look at correct. We need to consider the area if we are directly calculating the. Sorry, hold on a second. Let me check one by one. Okay, no. I think it's better this way. So first, this is a simple correlation, only density versus mass versus volume. Okay, so hopefully you understand that this 0.12 cubic meter is the accumulation of the particles, of the blue particles written over here. Okay, but now don't forget that there is an empty space in between all those small particles, right? So that's still as a volume of a particle. That's the volume of a particle. So now if you want to calculate the height of the fixed bed, okay, now how to convert from this volume of the particle to height of the particle, okay, height of the fixed bed. So maybe it's better for me to write it this way. Now height of the particle of the fixed bed is the volume of the particle divided by the area, right? Volume divided by the cross area, then you get the height. But this is still assuming the epsilon to be 1. This is still assuming that all the space can be used to fill the particle. So that's why don't forget to consider the 1 minus epsilon, because not all of the space can be used to fill the particle. Okay, any question? So that's why the solution over here, it's provided that, same thing, okay? That's the volume, then, okay, I think this is, it's too much L over here. Divided by a 1 minus 0.5. So before being fluidized at fixed bed condition, before being fluidized, if you measure strictly on the correlation between the amount of the particle, your height will be 0.42. Okay, but it could be different when it's already become fluidized. Okay, that's not a good picture. So maybe it already less dense, but the amount of the particle should be the same, right? Because we don't remove the particle. So now that's the question of the, well, let me change the variable to be consistent with the solution. Okay, that's the L, that's LMF. Okay, it was known that from the after fluidization, the height of the fluidized bed is 3 times of the bed diameter. Okay, in fluidized, then the LMF become 3 times diameter of the vessel. So it's just a correlation from the area, okay, from the area, because we know that area is d square per 4. Okay, so now we get that after being fluidized, it becomes 1.85 meter. Previously, it's only 0.42 meter. Okay, so of course the epsilon will also change. Here epsilon is 0.05. Now the epsilon should be more dense, should be higher. Okay, should be more dense. Any questions so far? And again, this is now the volume of the particle, because that's the same formula, right? That's the volume of the particle. It still can be considered as a surface area times the length of the minimum fluidization. Now we know that this is actually 1.85, and we know that it's still 0.3 meter, but we know the epsilon MF now changes. Okay, previously we used the same principle when the length still 0.3, when the A is still 0.3, but we know that at that time the epsilon to be 0.05. Okay, 1 minus 0.05. So now when the length increased by 6-fold because of the fluidization with the same amount of the particle, of course the epsilon at fluidization must change. Any question or correction? No? See what's the next question. Now the next question is the pressure drop itself. What's the pressure drop under minimum fluidization condition? Okay. Here, if we want to take advantage of the formula that we have, the second approach that I told you in this slide, that's the formula in this slide, because the epsilon already known, the delta rho already known, the length at the fluidized already known. So we can take advantage of those data availability. Okay, that's the meter, that's the at the fluidized minimum fluidization, and then that's the delta rho, that's the G. So simply by putting those numbers, we get that the delta P is almost 10,000 Pascal. So almost 0.1 bar. Okay, and the last step is to calculate the UMF. That's the UMF. What's the UMF for this particle size? So if you want to double check using this correlation, go ahead later, okay, after I conclude the session. But here is we want to take advantage the correlation of delta P at fixed bed using the velocity at minimum velocity. Okay, let me copy paste the initial formula first. Okay. Okay, it's actually provided over there. So this is actually calculated at UMF. Okay. Here, this is already known from that number. The dP is provided in the question. Epsilon already provided from B question. That's from C. That's provided from B as well. No, that's known from the from the B question. Rho is known. That's what we want to calculate, right? So again, that's the combined use of two delta P calculation that I told you. Okay, so delta P is equal to delta P. So of course, now the 9791 will be equal to this whole formula, right? F rho U MF square L MF 1 minus mu epsilon per dP epsilon cubic. Okay. Everything already provided. That's known, that's known, that's known, that's known, except for two parts. Okay. So you want to calculate the UMF, but you don't know the F. The F itself has not been known. Okay. But remember that or maybe if you still keep calculating the FP here as a function of the UMF because you haven't finished the UMF, that's still not known. So 0.592 per UMF square will be the same with F. We have one equation, but two variables are still not solved. Okay, so we need to compare it with other number, right? Here, the extra equation that can be used is the, remember the F that I think it's provided in your homework. This part. What if you can take advantage of those equation? So FP is 150 per RE plus 175, and it should also be the same with 0.592 per USF square. So that should be the same with 150 per RE plus 1.75. Okay, and RE is of course coming from rho U D per 1 minus epsilon mu. So now you eliminate the F part. You eliminate the F part because F now is substituted with Reynolds, and Reynolds is substituted with rho U D per 1 minus mu and 1 minus epsilon and mu. And in this equation, now the only thing that has not been solved is actually the U part. Okay, so it's like a solving of a quadratic expression. So that's the Reynolds. Okay, so now you only have one equation with U at only one variable that is known, which is the UMF. From this correlation, now you can estimate that UMF to be able to get the fluidization condition expressed in the equation, it should have a minimum fluidization condition at 0.234 meter per second. Okay. Any question or any part that has to be re-explained? Okay, this is your last chance. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
So you can use any equation in the fixed bed as long as you use the UMF?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
If you want to use simply this first equation, do it at UMF condition.
All right, sir. Thank you.
That should also give you the delta P. If I go back to this region, okay, that will give you the delta P all of this region, starting from minimum fluidization up until the very end of the fluidization. Why? Because when you put it to the chart, that will give you the same delta P, even though you keep increasing the velocity.
Sir, can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
It's about the fluidized bed combustor. How would you ignite the coal?
Okay, so that's a good question. When you want to have a combustion, that means you need three parts. Fire triangle. Okay, I don't know if you already learned about fire triangle. That means you need a fuel, you need oxygen, and then you need ignition source, or let me put it as an ignition. Okay, ignition could be heat, ignition could be fire, ignition could be electrical. Okay, as long as you combine or you mix the correct amount of fuel and oxygens, and then it's being ignited, then it will burn, right? Here you have the coal. Okay, here you already have the coal, and then you already provide the oxygen from the bottom. Okay, so the key point over here for you is how can you provide the ignition. Okay, so maybe you have this is a couple of options to provide ignition. Maybe you have a fuel gas to help initial ignition. Okay, that's possible. So there is a line, probably something over here. Okay, then when you burn it, then you already get okay, let me change the color directly to red. So once you get a ignition, a fire, that's what we call as a flame. Okay, by putting it this way, you have two kind of ignition: direct ignition because of the flame, and you can also imagine that at this location, the temperature must be hot. Okay, when the temperature must be hot, then that also acts as another ignition source for the combustion process. So the coal already flying around, and then the fluidizing air is coming from the bottom. Then it's ignited by the fire. Then it consumes the coal. It produces the reaction. So maybe that's my question. Sorry, my answer.
I see, sir. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? So So it starts from this slide, okay? So please make sure that you understand this slide, so all the derivation about the delta P becomes clear and makes sense. Any other question? Okay, this is your last chance, okay? Because I'll finish my part already. So yeah, I'll finish the lecture early if you don't have any question, because we already have extra time on last session. Okay, if you don't have any more question, then I'll finish the course. Just practice, okay? Because I know that there are a lot of formula, but it's an open book, so I think the most important for you is to understand the principle and then at least try it once, how to substitute the number and the technique of the initial assumption, whether it's a laminar or whether it's a turbulent, reconfirm the regimes, that kind of thing. Okay, so, and last but not least, of course, practice from the slides or from the exam from last year, so that you'll be ready for the next exam, which I believe will be held on the final exam week. Okay. Okay, if so, I will conclude the session. So next week you will see Pak Wawan, okay, and maybe I will join for the last session if required, just to conclude the semester. Okay. Okay, see you and good luck for your exam.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.